under the nuclear deal within the next decade. Hello, everyone, and welcome to America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Shawn.
And I'm Arthel Neville. All of this coming amid new reports that the U.S. is ramping up cyber attacks against Iranian rocket and missile launchers. This follows the president's decision to stop planned military strikes against the regime for shooting down an unmanned American drone. On Fox News Sunday, Republican Senator Tom Cotton says the White House should consider using military force to deter further aggression.
What I see is Iran steadily marching up the escalation chain. It started out with threats. It went to an attack on vessels in ports. It went to an attack on vessels at sea. Now it's an unmanned American aircraft. I fear that if Iran doesn't have a firm set of boundaries drawn around its behavior, we're going to see an attack on a U.S. ship or U.S. manned aircraft.
All right, let's go to David Spunt now. He's live at the White House with more on this story. David?
Well, hi, Arthel. Those sanctions going to kick in tomorrow in Iran, Tehran, Iran, to be absolutely specific. President Trump said yesterday before departing for Camp David that he prefers dialogue. He wants to talk with the Iranians. He doesn't want war. But before there's dialogue, it appears that there will be sanctions that will go into effect tomorrow. And these are additional sanctions. Now, just for some context, on Thursday, Iran's Revolutionary Guard announced that it shot down an American drone. That drone unmanned, but it provoked President Trump and his team to get extremely close to ordering an airstrike on Iran. The president canceled that strike after he learned of the casualties that would be involved.
Everybody was saying I'm a warmonger, and now they say I'm a dove. And I think I'm neither. You want to know the truth. I'm a man with common sense, and that's what we need in this country is common sense. But I didn't like the idea of them knowingly shooting down an unmanned drone, and then we kill 150 people. I didn't like that. If the leadership of Iran behaves badly, then it's going to be a very, very bad day for them.
As to the type of sanctions, the president would not get into specifics. He did mention Iran's economy several times and how making a deal with the United States would improve that economy and really avoid war altogether.
Could have a deal with them very quickly if they want to do it. It's up to them. But if Iran wants to become a wealthy nation again, become a prosperous nation, we'll call it, let's make Iran great again. Does that make sense? Make Iran great again. It's okay with me. But they're never going to do it if they think in 5 or 6 years they're going to have a nuclear weapon.
Convincing another nation to make a deal with the United States to better its economy, does that sound familiar? Very similar tactic, Arthel, President Trump is using with North Korea to try to work a deal there to get Kim Jong-un to give up his nuclear arsenal. I asked President Trump yesterday on the South Lawn if he would consider meeting with leaders in Tehran, including the Ayatollah. He said he wants conversations to take place. The president will come back to the White House later this afternoon. He's golfing right now, but he did spend the night in Camp David. Arthel, back to you.
Okay, David. Thank you, David Spunt. Eric.
And for more on our continuing confrontation with the Iranian regime, retired Air Force Lieutenant General David DePula joins us, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. So, General, do you think the president did the right thing in not pulling the trigger on an attack?
Well, the short answer, Eric, is yes. I think what's important to recognize is that the near-term actions need to put in the context of what is our desired long-term strategic outcome. In other words, while the president and his staff need to take action one step at a time, they need to consider 10 steps ahead. And I think if you listen to what's coming out of the administration and the president's advisors, that's exactly what you hear. The actions that have been taken, the prudent restraint that the president took in not jumping to military action in response to the Iranian aggression, gives the Iranians an off-ramp to discuss the future with the president conflict, because that's not true.
And it certainly could send or would send a message to Tehran. Here's how the president sees it in what he said yesterday before he left for Camp David.
I think the response should be, well, first of all, as you know, we've done very massive sanctions. We're increasing the sanctions now. But the response is always going to be very strong. I built up a lot of capital. I've had a lot of people that aren't Trump fans saying, I can't believe. You know, a lot of them said, we're going to be in World War III the first week. Didn't work out that way.
He says the response will be strong. Tomorrow he's going to announce tougher sanctions. He's already sanctioned the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, oil industry, banks, financial institutions, officials. What next in terms of his maximum pressure campaign do you see?
Well, I think targeting steel and aluminum. There are other materials that are still viable to coming under sanctions that put pressure on the regime. What has been announced recently as well in the context of offensive cyber operations, we can't forget that that is now becoming a more nominal element in the bag of tools that the president has for accomplishing
they're doing that now.
his objectives.
According to the reports, they've cyber attacked the Iranian missile program to try to stop them from launching any more ballistic missiles.
Right. So these are all elements that provide pressure to achieve the national security objectives without necessarily using kinetic force.
And in terms of protecting the ships and preventing any more attacks, there have already been 6 attacks on Iranian oil tankers. Do you think that the administration's next step should try and form an international force, much like we saw during the tanker wars in the 1980s, 87, protecting the tankers and the ships in the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, yeah, Eric, I think you're spot on. I mean, in one of the courses of action that I'm sure is being considered is to declare a no-sail zone, if you will, around commercial shipping. The specifics are not as important, but a certain distance, which if a ship approaches within that distance, they're subject to destruction. That is another way to establish limits, if you will, and have a clear understanding of the consequences that might occur if the Iranians proceed to violate them.
And finally, General, what do you predict? How do you see this going? Let's say the Iranians take out one of our warplanes or allies' assets, such as other oil tankers, or there's more of a serious type of attack. What do you think is going to happen?
It's difficult to ascertain what's going to happen. What's important is that the president and his team have put in place the conditions to defend U.S. and allied forces. The next steps, I mean, we clearly have time on our side now. Another point I wanted to make to your audience that is not discussed is the Iranians being on notice that they're subject to attack for any more aggressive action have to maintain a high state of alert. That's costly. It's also very wary on the people that have to maintain that support. So that puts pressure on them as well. And the president needs to take this time to gather up the coalition of allies and to isolate Iran and undo what Iran was trying to do to us, and that's isolate the United States. And I think that's moving forward in a very appropriate manner.
That's a very good point, that the pressure is on Iran. The folks who call us the great Satan and still chant death to America, the pressure's on. General, thank you. Good to see you.
You bet.
Responding on Twitter saying, quote, Mr. President, delay is welcome. Time is needed for comprehensive immigration reform. Families belong together. Let's go to Christina Coleman now. She is live in Los Angeles with more in this story. Christina.
Arthel, President Trump back on Twitter early this morning encouraging Democrats to reach an agreement on immigration now that he's given them a new 2-week deadline, writing, quote, I want to give the Democrats every last chance to quickly negotiate simple changes to asylum and loopholes. This will fix the southern border, together with the help that Mexico is now giving us. Probably won't happen, but worth a try. 2 weeks and big deportation begins. Acting ICE Director Mark Morgan appeared on Justice with Judge Janine last night, confirming reports that leaks to the media of operational details were partly to blame for postponing the raids. He said the president protected ICE agents by calling them off and is giving Congress another chance to come up with bipartisan immigration reform. But Morgan also said ICE always has the authority to enforce the rule of law.
I've got the green light to anyone that's here in violation of federal immigration law. I have the authority and the support to go after them, apply consequences to people. We start removing people that have final orders, including families, the numbers will go down. This crisis will be positively impacted. We don't talk about it enough. Interior enforcement is a key to de-incentivizing these people coming.
Vice President Mike Pence also doing damage control this morning, calling on Congress to close immigration loopholes that he says serve as enticements to cartels and human traffickers.
Honestly, the president, I believe it could happen in 15 minutes. If Democrats in Congress will simply step up and agree to close the loopholes that we know human traffickers are using to exploit vulnerable families.
Los Angeles is one of at least 10 major metropolitan areas that would have been targeted during the deportation raids. Local immigration activists plan demonstrations at a downtown detention center today and every day this week. Arthel?
Christina Coleman, thank you. And for more on this, we're going to bring in Tom Homan. He's the retired ICE director and a Fox News contributor. All right, Mr. Homan, so is this operation on hold or not?
Yeah, the operation on hold. I think the president, it's a smart move on his part to give the Democratic leadership another shot of trying to fix the loopholes that caused this crisis to begin with. I mean, what I find peculiar is for a year and a half they refuse to fix any loopholes that have caused this crisis, but they wait till the day before ICE does their congressionally mandated duty and arrest people who've been ordered removed by a judge until they reach out to the president and want to talk. I'm not optimistic that they'll give anything meaningful that's going to prevent this from going on in the future. So again, I salute the president for at least trying. He can at least say, I've done everything I can to bring them to the table to fix this issue.
Now, I want to just highlight a couple of the items in the president's most recent proposal on immigration reform. The president wants to prioritize high-skilled immigrants and restrict family-based migration. And, of course, the details have yet to be spelled out, but there's no pathway to citizenship for dreamers, which is and always has been a non-starter for Democrats. So if the president really wants to move towards immigration reform, why start with a non-starter?
I think the president needs to have more information for Democrats. What are they proposing? And I've said many times there shouldn't be a pathway to citizenship for dreamers unless they address the underlying reason that these families are coming. All these 200,000 families have come the last few years. They're your next dreamer population. What are we going to do with them? Because these are children brought to the country no fault of their own. So I think the president wants to see what are we going to do to shut this off before we address the current dreamer population here. Again, I think it's a wise move. Let the Democrats once come to the table with a plan. The president already put an immigration plan out there. They haven't responded to it other than saying it's a non-starter for them.
What changes do you think are needed and would be effective?
I think we need to close the loopholes. We can keep putting Band-Aids on this wound, or we can heal the wound. We got to stop the flood of people coming in, and that's easy. It's just three things they need to do. They need to change the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, where children from Central America are treated the same way as children in Mexico. Once it's ascertained they're not a victim of trafficking, we can remove them. Number two, change the Flores Asylum Agreement, which will allow us to detain families for 40 or 45 days until they get to see a judge. And if they're ordered removed, they get to stay. They could change that easily.
Well, then why wouldn't the president exercise executive power if he wants to get that done?
No, that's a Ninth Circuit, that's a district court decision, a Ninth Circuit decision. Judge Jolly G, the Ninth Circuit, made the decision, so that needs to be fixed by Congress. I don't think the president can overrule the circuit court.
Okay, I have a follow-up, but let me move on because I want to go here. If the president hasn't had success in working with Congress, some of the things you just pointed out, in 2.5 years, what makes him think that he's going to get a solution to his liking in 2 weeks? And really, it's 1 week, because the following week is, Congress is out for the 4th of July holiday. So you see, so some of the president's critics could look at this and say, well, he's really not serious. He's just using this to continue whatever his campaign promise was, and perhaps a ploy. I'm sure the president is serious about immigration reform, but some of his critics would say, he's kind of teeing up again how he's going to play this for his 2020 reelection.
Then the critics don't understand the dynamics involved. These two loopholes I just discussed could be fixed in 1 day. They don't need 2 weeks. They can do it. They can do it today. They can do it tomorrow. They can fix these two loopholes today. So you don't need 2 weeks.
So let me ask you, Mr. Homan, could those loopholes you're talking about be fixed without any additional spending for border security?
Yeah, I mean, fixing the TVPRA just is a matter of sending children home that are not victims of trafficking, who do have no case for asylum. The other one, keeping families together. ICE doesn't have so many family beds, but use those beds as the families come in. Not all families will be detained, but it's a start. So this won't be a huge budget crisis at all. This is about them having the willpower to close the loopholes that are causing this crisis.
Well, then if it can be fixed without any additional funding, because that's part of the Democrats, you've got two bills that are going to be proposed this week. One from the Senate, that's what, $4.6 billion, and the Democrat from in the House, $4.5 billion. President's asking $5 billion. So they're close on numbers. But again, so if you're saying the two issues, the loopholes that you pointed that could stop this, stop the bleeding, if you will, and the traffic, incoming traffic, illegal traffic, then why not do that first to fix the loopholes that you're saying is the big problem, then get to the spending? Because the spending is the problem is, again, the Democrats are saying there's no pathway to citizenship for the Dreamers, which again...
Because, look, what the president asked, the supplemental is absolutely needed for the families currently in detention, the children in detention. Look, every day we read the horrific conditions of the Border Patrol facilities because they weren't built for this. If the Democrats really care about the safety and welfare of those in Border Patrol custody, then give them money to have additional shelters, have professional medical care on site.
Well, the Democrats are willing to give money for the humanitarian aid. They just don't want to give money for border security. Meaning the wall.
We can keep going back, and the Congress can fix this. But look, if you can take care of the families and give them the support they needed, but you got to have the border security to stop the flood coming in, whether it's border barriers, stricter laws, or fixing loopholes. I think there's no one clean fix to this. It's a couple fixes, but I'm saying you close those two loopholes, that will stop about 80% of this traffic.
Yeah, really quickly, what do you think about the humanitarian crisis in terms of you've got children there, regardless of what your position is in terms of how they got there and why they're there at the border under less than humane conditions? I mean, should the U.S. provide some money immediately to make sure the kids have some of the basic needs for sanitary needs?
Absolutely, and the Border Patrol has been asking for help with that. These Border Patrol agents, they care about these women and children. I mean, they're parents too. They have their own children, so they certainly wish Congress to give them help. These are law enforcement officers that weren't trained to change diapers and make formulas and take care of children and put them and have them in facilities and not designed to keep them in a facility. So Border Patrol has been asking for a long time. Give us help to at least properly take care of these people while you continue to argue about what the next step is in the legislative reform.
Yeah. Mr. Homan, thank you so much. I mean, obviously this is not a new problem it's been in this administration and previous administrations as well. So hopefully we can eventually get to some immigration reform that'll be great for the country. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
North Korea, I've heard about this. They say that Kim Jong-un has received, quote, an excellent letter from President Trump. So what's in it? And will it lead to a possible third summit? And after a whirlwind weekend in South Carolina, the 2020...
Well, the White House confirming that President Trump sent a letter to North Korea's dictator Kim Jong-un. This comes just days after Kim met with his crucial ally, Chinese President Xi. The North Korean leader signaling to Mr. Xi he is hoping to meet the U.S. halfway after talks broke down at the Hanoi summit earlier this year. Jillian Turner is following all of this, and she's live in Washington. Hi, Jillian.
Hi, Arthel. So White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders alerted the press pool early this morning that the president is still talking with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, despite the fact that their last face-to-face summit in Hanoi fell apart at the seams. She said a letter was sent by President Trump and correspondence between the two leaders has been ongoing. Now, the last the White House had publicly confirmed correspondence between the two leaders was June 11th. That's when President Trump said Kim had sent him a letter. Despite that flurry of correspondence, however, national security officials tell Fox News there are no plans underway now for another Trump-Kim summit. President Trump has floated the idea publicly and privately in recent weeks, but these officials say neither the White House nor any other government departments or agencies are working on or even considering a summit right now. The president's feeling so positive about the relationship, he touted North Korea today in a laundry list of what he believes are his foreign policy successes.
I've had a lot of people that aren't Trump fans saying, I can't believe, a lot of them said, we're going to be in World War III the first week. Didn't work out that way. We're doing great in North Korea. We're doing great in a lot of different places. We knocked out the caliphate in Syria. We knocked out 100%. Remember, I was going to leave it.
Kim Jong-un may not be meeting with President Trump anytime soon, but he did meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping just 2 days ago in North Korea. Both governments came out of that meeting hailing it as both friendly and successful. Policymakers say if Trump and Kim were to set up a meeting in the future, both sides would need to agree on exactly what denuclearization means. Back to you in New York.
All right, Jelaine, thanks so much. Back here at home, the man convicted of ramming his car into that crowd of protesters, injuring dozens and killing one of the demonstrators in Charlottesville, Virginia. Well, now he is pleading for mercy. Lawyers for 22-year-old James Alex Fields Jr. says his age and history of mental illness should factor into his sentence. Prosecutors argue he has shown no remorse and should serve the maximum time allowed, life in prison without parole. Fields pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in the death of 32-year-old Heather Heyer. You may remember she was killed in August of 2017 while protesting the Unite the Right rally. Hundreds of white nationalists marched to demand the city protect Confederate statues there. That sparked those large counter-demonstrations leading to violent clashes that left more than 30 people injured. Fields will be sentenced this coming Friday. State of South Carolina. You know, almost the entire Democratic presidential field took the stage there at the 2020 State Democratic Convention this weekend. Among them, as you can see, front-runner, former Vice President Joe Biden. You know, though, he is facing some fallout over those controversial remarks about his being able to have worked with segregationist senators when they served together in the upper chamber. Peter Ducey is live in Columbia, South Carolina, with all the fallout. So, Peter, there's some controversy about this, and some of his rivals are trying to make hay over what the vice president said.
And, Eric, Joe Biden doesn't bring up segregationists anymore, but he does get asked about them. Specifically, the part of that comment from last week's fundraiser where he talked about one segregationist senator calling him son instead of boy.
It hurts when you talk about boy. It means something different to us. It hurts when you call a racist like you normalize. You're not. That's not the Biden I got to know. Don't you understand?
No, I do fully understand. That's not what I said, though. They didn't print the whole deal.
So Joe Biden claims he was taken out of context and has not apologized to either of the senators who called him out. Kamala Harris, who says she wouldn't be a senator if segregationists Biden talks about being civil with had their way, or Cory Booker, who publicly called for Biden to say sorry. But Booker appears to have changed his mind after a private call with the former VP. He now says, no need to bury the hatchet.
I did what I think is the thing you do for people you love and care about, which is you speak truth to them. So there's no hatchet. I have a lot of respect and gratitude for the vice president.
Democrats had ample opportunities to go after the frontrunner Biden this weekend on stage, but nobody did. So now we wait to see if any of the polling down here in South Carolina reflects any sort of shakiness in his support, which is very strong right now. Eric?
Yeah, we just saw him in that T-shirt, and the others. They were the James Clyburn fish fry, which is a really big political event. And I guess, Peter, their appearances have kind of... there they are. See them all in the T-shirts? At the fish fry, you got the steak in Iowa, you got everything all over the country, and then you got the fish fry. Meanwhile, I guess this helps them prepare for the debates this weekend, this coming week.
Right, because at the fish fry, everybody was on the clock. They only had 1 minute to talk, and James Clyburn was standing just a few steps away, ready to introduce the next speaker at all times. Then you had this convention yesterday where, kind of like at an award show, they started to play presidential contenders off the stage with music when their 7 minutes were up. So now that that is all done, the contenders have gone home for private debate prep. Some of them, like the lawmakers, the members of Congress, the mayors, the governors, they will prepare around their day job schedules, but not everybody has a day job right now, like the contenders who are retired or who recently lost elections. They might have some more time to prep for Miami. Eric.
All right, like speed dating, presidential style. Peter, thank you. Barthel.
Well, the White House unveils its plan for peace in the Middle East, but will rising tensions with Iran complicate potential talks? New reaction from overseas coming up next.
Iran can never have nuclear weapons, not against the USA and not against the world.
National Security Advisor John Bolton issuing a warning for Iran while meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem, cautioning the regime not to confuse American prudence for weakness. This as both Washington and Tehran reportedly step up cyber attacks against each other. Ellison Barber is live in Jerusalem with the latest. Ellison.
Hi, Arthel. Ambassador Bolton is in Jerusalem to meet with his Israeli and Russian counterparts. As you said, he met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a little earlier today. Syria and the influence of Iran in the ongoing Syrian civil war is the focus of these meetings, but a significant amount of attention right now is going towards the tension between the United States and Iran.
Neither Iran nor any other hostile actor should mistake U.S. prudence and discretion for weakness. No one has granted them a hunting license in the Middle East.
Bolton said the U.S. is likely going to announce sanctions on Monday, additional sanctions against Iran on Monday. Prime Minister Netanyahu also commented on what he called Iran's active aggression, but did not say anything about President Trump's decision to call off military strikes. There are reports U.S. military cyber forces launched a strike against the Iranian military's computer system on Thursday. The U.S. Department of Defense is not confirming it, telling Fox News, quote, as a matter of policy and for operational security, we do not discuss cyberspace operations, intelligence, or planning. Ambassador Bolton is expected to meet with his Israeli counterpart tomorrow. A trilateral meeting between Russia, the U.S., and Israel is set for Tuesday. Arthel?
Listen, meanwhile, Jared Kushner unveiled the first section of his Middle East peace plan, which calls for $50 billion to be spent in the Palestinian territories over 10 years. Now, the White House says ultimately this will be the deal of the century. What is the response there?
Well, Palestinians say this deal is dead on arrival. Within hours of that proposal being released, a number of Palestinian officials publicly said they do not see it as a serious plan. One PLO official says it amounts to extortion. Hamas says the U.S. is delusional.
Our people have sacrificed martyrs, injured people, and prisoners to retrieve their rights, and they will continue to do so. And their rights are not for sale in any way.
In Israel, the plan drew mixed reactions, but most say it fails to address many of the political issues at the heart of the conflict. A cabinet member and close ally of Netanyahu dismissed the proposed land link between the West Bank and Gaza Strip, telling Israeli public radio it is irrelevant as long as Hamas controls Gaza. As for Prime Minister Netanyahu, he has not commented. At that press conference earlier today, a reporter shouted a question about this proposal. Netanyahu did not answer. Arthel?
All right, live there in Jerusalem, Ellison Barber. Thanks, Ellison.
Well, Acting ICE Director Mark Morgan has talked about President Trump's immigration raids that were scheduled to begin today. But you know, the president yesterday afternoon, well, he unexpectedly postponed his plans for 2 weeks. That to give Congress some more time to try and solve the border crisis. That after sources told Fox News House Speaker Nancy Pelosi urged the president to call off those raids. They did that during a Friday phone call. But will this delay actually bring some breathing time in Congress to get something done? Philip Wegman joins us, White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. So, Phil, is this the art of the immigration deal, a chance to really try and force some immigration reform on Capitol Hill?
Don't hold your breath. I mean, Congress was unable to achieve meaningful immigration reform or even address the asylum issue that the president is talking about now when Republicans controlled both chambers. And since Nancy Pelosi has become House Speaker, Democrats have also been very hesitant to deal with the White House here. So it seems unlikely that something significant is going to get done. But what this does allow President Trump to do is it allows him to tell his base, as 2020 is around the corner, that he's still focused on the border issue and that he's trying to get something done. It's just that Democrats aren't helping him. That'll be his argument.
All right, here's what the acting director, Mr. Morgan, said about that when he was on Fox News Channel last night.
There are two major elements that Congress could fix, and they've failed to do. The Florida Settlement Agreement, which says families, if you're a kid and you're a family, you have to be released. We have no alternative. We need to fix that. Congress needs to help us fix that. And so right now, that's what happens. We've tried everything to get them to come willingly to ICE, to work with us. They have refused. We have no alternative. I don't want to go to their house. I don't want to go to their work site, but they've left us no alternative.
Well, you're speaking to Judge Janine. As you can say, you can fix two things right away. Why don't they do that?
You can certainly hear the frustration in his voice right now. And whether or not this was a politically motivated decision to backtrack on those deportations or not, what this does let President Trump do is make the argument that we just heard, which is that he's willing to sit down with Democrats at the table and hammer out a deal. Whether or not they actually show up to those negotiations and something gets done is irrelevant from a political perspective, because it allows the president to draw a contrast between himself, Democrats, and some of the more radical voices in the Democratic caucus right now.
Well, the Senate just took out of committee $4.6 billion for this. What are the chances, do you think, that the House will agree to anything on that?
And it's important to note that that money is focused on humanitarian efforts at the border, not the border security that the president has been pushing for some time. I think that what's happening right now is that it's frustrating this president who made immigration reform and border security really the central focus of his 2016 campaign, because it's going to be a lot harder for him to make that same argument going into 2020 when you see that the wall, as promised, has not been built. Border crossings are much higher than before, and even under his administration, while deportations have increased, they're not at the same numbers they were at during President Obama's tenure. So whether or not his base still thinks that he is pushing as hard as he promised on this issue, that remains to be seen, or whether or not they'll just blame Democrats instead of him.
Yeah, the president seemed to say that he's giving them some breathing room to try and do something. Here's what he said about this issue.
If Congress gave us something quickly on asylum, something quickly on loopholes where we get rid of the loopholes, the border would be so beautiful. But the Democrats just won't do it. But maybe now they will, because there's no question you have a national emergency. They said that in the last caravan, they had hundreds of people that commit crime trying to come into our country. We're not letting them.
The president's focusing on asylum, trying to tighten up the asylum laws. The majority of those seeking asylum from the 3 Central American countries are turned away or turned down after going through their hearings, as well as those loopholes. And earlier we had Tom Homan on with Arthel, and he said that they could just fix those immediately. Here's what Homan told us.
That they'll give anything meaningful that's going to prevent this from going on in the future. So, again, I salute the president for at least trying. He can at least say, I've done everything I can to bring them to the table to fix this issue.
So finally, would that be the message that the president will bring when these 2 weeks are over?
I believe so, and it's not an apples to apples comparison, but it is noteworthy here that President Trump is doing something similar to what he did during the negotiations with Mexico on the immigration issue. He threatened tariffs, and he was able to get an agreement out of that. I think that he's doing something similar because he's not backing away from the threat of deportations. Instead, he's giving more runway to actually get something done. If Democrats and the White House are able to come to an agreement, then I think that he will tout that as a victory. But if they don't, I think that he will also be able to go back to voters in 2020 and say, I haven't changed. I'm just as tough as I always was.
He set a deadline, and the clock is ticking. We'll see what happens and stay on it. Phil Wegman of Real Clear Politics. Phil, thank you.
Thank you.
Arthel.